Good morning, my wonderful sea turtles. I miss you guys so much, but I'm super excited to start doing these YouTube videos to teach you some short little lessons so we can keep the learning going. So today, we're kind of going to take a step back away from fractions, start going into it a little bit easier, getting a hold of all this, YouTube learning, and then we can go back to fractions. So today, we're going to be learning about area and perimeter. And for some of us, it's going to be a review. So first we have area, and that's going to be the amount of square units that fills the inside. Okay, and I'm going to be uploading this picture to our Google Classroom so that way you can go back and look at this when you're working so you can always have it. So you see, if we have a regular rectangle, we're just going to go ahead and do the length times the width. So in this picture, it's going to be 3 times 2, which is going to give us an area of 6 inches squared. But then we take a look at this weird looking shape right here. This isn't a rectangle, so we don't have just one length and we don't have just one width. So instead, we see that it's broken up into squares. And what we can do whenever we come up to a shape that isn't a regular rectangle or a square, we just count the squares that are inside of it. So we go ahead and count, and we see that this shape has an area of 8 square units. And then we have our regular old rectangle that is not broken up into squares, and we see that the length is 12 inches, the width is 5. So we go ahead and do our formula of 12 times 5, which is going to give us 60 inches squared. We've worked on this some in class, so I hope that this is a review for you guys. But then we go ahead down to the perimeter. And the way that the perimeter is different is that it is going to be adding up all the sides because it's the distance around the shape. Okay, so we have this shape of our pentagon. We have this top side as 7. These two sides across from each other that are 4. And then our bottom side's 2. So we're going to go ahead and add up 7 plus 4 plus our other 4. And then plus our 2 2's at the bottom. So we have 7 plus 4 plus 4 plus 2 plus 2, which is going to equal 19. And the cool thing about perimeter is that it doesn't matter the shape since we're just adding everything up. So we could have a shape that has a million sides, and if all those sides are 2 inches, we can add it to 1,000,000 times and get our perimeter no problem. Whereas area is a little bit more difficult. So, like I said, I'm going to be uploading this to our Google Classroom so you can keep looking at that anchor chart to help you with the work that you're going to be doing by yourself. We're going to do a couple practice problems here. So let's say that John is building a fence around his garden, okay? All right, so we're going to say that this is John's garden. So if he wants to build a fence goes around the outside. So I want us to think, are we going to be using area or perimeter to just figure out the fence around the outside? So if you're thinking perimeter, then that's exactly what we're going to do. So let's say that this is going to be 6 inches. All right. This side right here is going to be 10 inches, and if we want to know how much fencing John needs, we're going to go ahead, continue labeling our rectangle. So opposite sides in a rectangle are going to be the same length. So if this one was 6 inches, this one's also going to be 6 inches. If this one's 10 inches, this one down here is 10 inches. And we're going to go ahead and add all of these up. So we got 10 plus 10, 6 plus 6. And I like grouping the same numbers together, but you can add it however you want because we know the commutative property of addition, it doesn't matter what order that we add. So we have 10 plus 10, which is 20 inches. 6 plus 6, which is 12 inches. And then we can go ahead and add these together. 0 plus 2 is 2, always starting in our ones place. 2 plus 1 is 3. So John is going to need 32 inches of fencing to go around his garden. All right, so this was perimeter. all right? Because the fence goes around the garden. We weren't focusing on anything inside of his garden. But let's say we wanted to know how many plants John could fit in his garden. All right, so if we know that John's garden is 6 inches by 10 inches, now we want to answer the question, how much space John has to put plants in. All right, so if we're answering this question, how much space John has to plant, that's going to be focusing on the inside. All right, and remember, when we focus on the inside, the amount of space inside of a shape, that's going to be area. So we're going to take our 10-inch length times our 6-inch width. Okay, and this should be a super easy multiplication problem for you guys. This is going to be 60 inches squared. And we square this because on the inside, it's talking about square units. So we're going to put a square at inches squared. So the biggest thing to remember when you're doing these practice problems by yourself is remember that perimeter is the outside, like a fence in John's garden, and that area is going to be the inside, thinking about how much space John has to plant all of his plants in his garden. All right, so that is going to be it for our quick math lesson. If you want to go ahead and pause the video to work on your practice problems, you can. I'm going to go ahead and go straight into reading, and we're going to go ahead and pick up from where we left off and number the stars. So, just to give you guys a quick recap. Anne-Marie and her family and Ellen are all at her Uncle Henrik's house. Okay, they're out in the country. Uncle Henrik is a fisherman, so he lives right by the ocean on the coast. Ellen and Anne-Marie talk about going to the edge of the coast and being able to see Sweden from across the way. And I know you guys had some really great predictions on why it was important that Lois Lowry mentioned that they could see Sweden and that Sweden was so close. We just finished up the part where Uncle Henrik went fishing, and we know that that was actually code for picking up some Jewish people back in Copenhagen. Brought them back, and they were having a funeral, but they noticed that nobody was really talking. Nobody mentioned who this person was in the casket that was in their living room. So we were kind of suspicious that this wasn't actually a funeral at all, but kind of like a front that they put up so that the Germans wouldn't bother them if German soldiers were to come in and kind of raid the house. And at the very end of the chapter, we see Uncle Henrik coming off of his boat with 2 people and coming into the door, and it turns out that it's actually Ellen's parents. So I know all of us, we were talking about tone and mood the last time we read this, and all of us were happy because Ellen is finally reunited with her parents, and that's kind of a sigh of relief. We know that they're back together again, but we know that there must be another problem lying ahead. So we're kind of in the middle of the book right now. So what I want us to focus on, we've really been digging deep into these characters, and I want us to pay attention on the book is getting a little bit more complicated. The characters have seen some hardships, so be thinking, how are the characters changing from when we first saw them at the beginning of the book? You know, think about that opening scene when Anne-Marie and Ellen and Kirsty are walking home from school. Anne-Marie and Ellen are racing just like regular, 6th, 7th grade students. So be focusing on character changes when I'm reading this part of the chapter. You all are here now, Uncle Henrik said, looking around the living room. I must go. Anne-Marie stood in the wide doorway, looking in from the hall. The baby slept now, and its mother looked tired. Her husband sat beside her, his arm across her shoulders. The old man's head was still bent. Peter sat alone, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. It was clear that he was deep in thought. On the sofa, Ellen sat between her parents, one hand clasped tightly around her mother's. She looked up at Anne-Marie, but didn't smile. Anne-Marie felt a surge of sadness. The bond of their friendship had not been broken, but it was as if Ellen had moved now into a different world, the world of her own family and whatever lay ahead of them. So, I'm asking myself a question, because remember, it's always important to ask questions while you're reading. If I'm reunited with my parents after not seeing them for a while, I am going to be overcome with joy and happiness. So it's interesting that Anne-Marie and Ellen are kind of exchanging this look of sadness, because we're thinking that this should be a happy time, that Ellen is finally back with her parents. So I want you to be thinking, why do you think that Ellen and Anne-Marie are looking at each other in a sad way? Why do you think this kind of is a sad moment for them and their friendship? The elderly bearded man looked up suddenly as Uncle Henrik prepared to go. "God keep you safe," he said in a firm but quiet voice. Henrik nodded. "God keep us all safe," he replied. Then he turned and left the room. A moment later, Anne-Marie heard him leave the house. Mama brought the teapot from the kitchen and a tray of cups. Anne-Marie helped her pass the cups around, and no one spoke. "Anne-Marie," Mama whispered to her in the hall, "you may go to bed if you want to. It is very late." Anne-Marie shook her head. But she was tired. She could see that Ellen was too. Her friend's head was leaning on her mother's shoulders, and her eyes closed now and then. Finally, Anne-Marie went to the empty rocking chair in the corner of the living room and curled there with her head against its soft, padded back. She dozed off. She was startled from her half-sleep by the sudden sweep of headlights through the sheer curtains and across the room as a car pulled up outside. The car door slammed. Everyone in the room tensed, and nobody spoke. She heard, as if in a recurring nightmare, the pounding on the door, and then the heavy, frightening, familiar staccato of boots on the kitchen floor. I want you to be thinking, when have we heard the mention of boots before earlier on in this book, and what do those mention of boots kind of bring along to the story? Who do you think they're talking about? The woman with the baby gasped and began suddenly to weep. The male, accented voice from the kitchen was loud. "We have observed," he said, "that an unusual number of people have gathered at this house tonight. What is the explanation?" "There has been a death," Mama's voice replied calmly. "It is always our custom to gather and pay our respects when a family member dies. I am sure you are familiar with the customs." One of the officers pushed Mama ahead of him from the kitchen and entered into the living room. There were others behind him. They filled the wide doorway. As always, their boots gleamed. Their guns, their helmets, all of them gleamed in the candlelight. Anne-Marie watched as the man's eyes moved around the room. He looked for a long time at the casket. Then he moved his gaze, focusing on each person in turn. When his eyes reached her, she looked back at him steadily. "Who died?" he asked harshly. No one answered. They watched Anne-Marie, and she realized that the officer was directing the question at her. Now she knew for certain what Uncle Henrik had meant when he had talked to her in the barn. To be brave came more easily if you knew nothing. She swallowed. "My great-aunt Bertie," she lied, but in a firm voice. The officer moved forward suddenly across the room to the casket. He placed one gloved hand on its lid. "Poor great-aunt Bertie," she lied. He said in a condescending voice. "I do know your customs," he said, turning his gaze towards Mama, who stood still in the doorway. "And I know it is the custom to pay one's respects by looking your loved one in the face. It seems odd to me that you have closed this coffin so tightly." So now I'm asking, I wonder what's in the casket. Why is it closed so tightly? Do you think that they were prepared for this and had, a fake dead body in there, or maybe somebody who had passed away on the ship that Uncle Henrik works on? I'm feeling very uneasy at this point, because I know that from the repetition in the other chapters that these German soldiers, they don't care and they don't respect their customs. So this German soldier quite possibly could open this casket, and then their whole plan could be ruined. His hand was in a fist, and he rubbed it across the edge of the polished lid. "Why is it not open?" he demanded. "Let us open it up and take one last look at Great Aunt Bertie." Anne-Marie saw Peter across the room stiffen in his chair. He lifted his chin and he reached slowly with one hand towards his side. Mama walked quickly across the room, directly to the casket, directly to the officer. "You're right," she said. "The doctor said it would be closed because Aunt Bertie died of typhus, and he said that there was a chance the germs would still be there, would still be dangerous. But what does he know? Only a country doctor and an old man at that. Surely typhus germs wouldn't linger in a dead person. And dear Aunt Bertie, I have been longing to see her face, to kiss her goodbye. Of course we will open the casket. I am glad you suggested." So we need some background knowledge for this. Typhus is a very contagious and infectious disease that was going on during this World War II period of time. It's now since, we have medicine for it. It isn't as prevalent now. But Mama is smart because she knows she's trying to say, you know what, you're right, let's open this casket. I mean, she did just have a really contagious disease, but yeah, let's open it up. And she knows by mentioning that this very contagious disease that Aunt Bertie had could maybe still be there even though she died, the German soldiers are probably going to say, you know what, you're right, we can keep it closed. That's called kind of reverse psychology. Maybe sometimes your parents do it to get you to clean the room or, get you to wash the dishes. Like, oh, you're right, you know what? Your sister is much better at cleaning the dishes anyways. I'm going to have her do it so, she can have some extra TV time. And you're right, you don't have to do it. By them phrasing it that way, and now makes it seem like you're deciding on your own to clean the dishes, or that you're deciding on your own to clean your room instead of them just telling you, clean your room, do the dishes. That's what Mama's doing here. Instead of her just saying, no, don't open the casket, and it being suspicious, she is kind of telling this lie to make the German soldiers come to their own conclusion. Yeah, she has this contagious disease, let's not open this casket. With a swift motion, the Nazi officer slapped Mama across her face. She staggered backward, and a white mark on her cheek darkened. You foolish woman, he spat. To think that we have any interest of seeing a body of your diseased aunt? Open it after we leave, he said. With one gloved thumb, he pressed a candle flame into the darkness. The hot wax spattered the table. Put all these candles out, he said, or pull the curtains. Then he strode to the doorway and left the room. Motionless, silent, one hand on her cheek, Mama listened. They all listened. As uniformed men left the house. In a moment, they heard car doors, the sound of its engine, and finally, they heard it drive away. Mama! Anne-Marie cried. Her mother shook her head quickly and glanced at the open window covered only by the sheer curtain. Anne-Marie understood. There might still be soldiers outside, watching and listening. So we're going to pause there and leave the rest of the chapter for tomorrow's lesson. But again, I want you to be thinking your exit ticket that you're going to type up on the Google Doc is pick one of the characters. It doesn't have to be Anne-Marie. It could be Ellen. It could be Ellen's mother. It could be Anne-Marie's mother, Uncle Henrik, Peter, anybody that has been a recurring character. And how have they changed from the first time that we saw them in the beginning of the book to now, right here in this middle part where things are starting to get more complicated. Think about the character actions. Think about how the characters are feeling at this moment in time compared to how they were feeling before. And make sure that you type that up on the Google Doc. I miss you guys so much, but I'm very excited for this YouTube adventure that we are all going to go ahead and jump in together. So I can't wait to see you guys tomorrow. Bye, Sea Turtles.